scripts run so that it basically configures it, right? So if you look at the setup logs that you have for Windows, you will see there is a detail.txt, there is a configuration detail.txt. So you do an installation and then do your configuration. The same thing happens for Linux. You first install the RPM, you first install the Debians, and then you configure your SQL Server. So you basically give the values like, should my SQL Server be a developer edition? No, or should it be an enterprise edition? So you basically select the SKU. Then you also give the SA password, because remember, when you're installing SQL Server on Linux, the default authentication mode is not going to be Windows authentication. I'll repeat this again. When you install SQL Server on Linux, the default authentication mode is not going to be Windows authentication, but it's going to be a SQL authentication, because chances of a Linux box being part of a Windows domain is very less. Does that mean that Windows authentication is not supported for SQL Server on Linux? No. Windows authentication is absolutely supported, fully supported for production workloads on SQL Server and Linux. And I'm going to show you how you can actually do that as well in the demo. So stay with me there. And you can then, when you're configuring, you give the SKU, you give the the SA password using which you're going to connect. And once you give all of those details, the configuration happens and the SQL Server runs as a default service. Now, the most important thing I want to tell you, if you're running SQL Server as a systemd, as a backend process on a Linux box, you only can have a default instance. You don't have a named instance concept for SQL Server on Linux. For that means on any server, if you run SQL Server as a systemd service, you can only install that as a default instance, which means you cannot have multiple instances installed on that same machine. With that said, that's how the behavior is for Linux for packages. There is the second option. So again, look at the screen on the right side, SQL Server at the center. We talked about the upper part of it, packages, rel/ubuntu. Now we are going to talk about the lower part of it. If you want to run multiple deployments of SQL Server on the same box, if you are someone who wants to quickly get started with SQL Server containers or SQL Server instances, deploy your databases, once your work is done, just delete it, all of that. Or if you're someone who has, let's say, an AI application which is currently born and written on an ecosystem that supports Kubernetes, OpenShift, and is container-based, and you want your data to also be co-located and run as a container, a stateful container, then you go to the second choice of the choice that you have on the screen, which is deploy SQL Server as containers. When you deploy SQL Server as containers, you can then install multiple instances. You can install them on a standalone machine like a VM or a physical machine, where you can have instance A, instance B, instance C. All of these instances are named instances and are completely independent of each other. If you want to also manage those containers using something like Kubernetes and OpenShift, you could do that. All of that is supported. Now you may ask me, where do I get these RPMs? Where do I get these Debians? Where do I get my container images? The links of each of those information is shared here. So at packages.microsoft.com, if you go there, you basically can download Debian on RPM depending upon the OS that you have. If you go to the Microsoft Artifact Registry, or if you want to download this from Docker Hub, you could do that as well. So the link is given there as well. Now, with that said, I hope one question that you might have is, Amit, if I don't have RHEL, if I don't have SLES, if I don't have Ubuntu, let's say I'm running Kali. If I'm running Kali, can I actually install SQL Server on that? Yes, you can. But is this something that we have tested internally in our environments? No. So that is why if you run SQL Server on any of the other distributions that you see listed here, if there is an issue and you call into the support lines for Microsoft And when you're working on those issues, the support team may ask you to repro these issues on one of these supported environments. And if you cannot repro that issue on one of the supported environments, then that support ticket could probably be a limited support that you get. So that is why we recommend that if you're testing this running in a QA dev environment, run it on your choice of operating system that you have. But if you're deploying it in production, please try using one of these environments that we've tested so that you get an end-to-end full support for your deployments. Otherwise, if you choose any other distribution apart from what is mentioned here and in the documentation, the support is practically limited. With that said, I know the second question that always comes up is what are some of the unsupported features for SQL Server and Linux? First I thought I'll just give you a link here and tell you folks, refer to this link just so that you know what are some of the unsupported features, like linked servers to heterogeneous databases. If you have an Oracle, a link server created on SQL Server that connects to Oracle, all of that, you basically can use Polybase, you can use other features. So I've listed all of that for your reference in case if you want to look at it. I also have one dedicated slide where I'm going to talk about it, right? So all of this is for you to just understand the different ecosystem in which you can basically deploy SQL Server on Linux. With that said, and if you have any questions, please put it on the chat window. We will take the last 5 minutes to answer those questions in the chat window. And if you could also go unmute in the last 5 minutes to ask those questions as well. So just an FYI. All right. With that said, let's talk about WSL. Today, I don't know if you noticed this, I'm running a Windows box. I'm running a Windows laptop. I don't have the ability to create a VM right away. I don't have a cloud-based account to create a VM, but I still want to try test Linux as package deployment, Linux as a container deployment. How do I do that on a Windows box? This was the exact question that as a team we wanted to solve a long time back. And that is where Windows Subsystem Linux comes into the picture. So you can today install Windows Subsystem Linux with a very simple command, WSL hyphen hyphen install, run this on your PowerShell box. This installs the feature called as Windows Subsystem for Linux, provided you have enabled features like WSL on your features and programs in the control panel. So you just need to enable some of those requirements. Once you've done that, WSL hyphen hyphen install should actually get you started with a Windows subsystem that runs. So it is nothing but it provides you a Linux environment directly on your box without the need for you to create a VM and all of that. So you don't have to worry on all of that. Second, any SQL Server deployments that you do on a WSL is not meant for production environments. Again, I'll just repeat on one specific aspect here. SQL Server on WSL and you're deploying a Linux versions of it, it's not meant for production environment. This is just meant for development so that someone with a Windows laptop can get started and get used to how the Linux environments work. For production, don't run SQL Server and Linux in WSL. Use containers, use VMs, use anything else, not the WSL for production workloads, right? That is an important criteria. And to get started, you have two options. You can install, after you install WSL, you can choose what operating system you want. Let's say I want to use Ubuntu 2204. Once you install Ubuntu 2204 on your WSL system, then you can just install SQL Server as a container or as a or as a package as a system D service. Now, with that said, one last thing before I talk about anything else, that is the unsupported list of features, right? This is a slide I added at the last because I wanted everybody to take a look at the list of items that are not supported on Linux. The reason I want to show this to you is it's very, very limited. and most of my customers today using SQL Server probably don't even use things like loading external access or unsafe CLR assemblies. They have Python or R languages using which they can achieve some of the work that was done with the assemblies. Using link servers to data sources other than SQL Server. Again, they have Polybase to do some of that work. So all of that has been informed and documented very clearly. And this is a list which I keep very handy and keep ensuring that we update it and is always updated to the latest of information that we have. You know what? For the last probably 20 minutes, I've been speaking a lot. So let's give a little break to my voice and let me just show you the demo. Again, in demo, you'll still hear my voice. That's a different thing, but let's show you some demo. I want to start with, let's say, WSL, right? Now, if you notice this, this is a terminal that I have open. This is a Windows terminal, right? And because I installed WSL, I have an option of running Ubuntu 2204 or anything of that sort. Now, just to give you an idea of the list of operating systems that I have, I can just run WSL minus L minus O. I don't know what I did. I think I know what I did. So this is what I should have been running. So you see, these are the different distributions that are available. Can I install SQL on all of these distributions? Probably yes. But what are some of the supported distributions? SLES, Ubuntu 2204, Ubuntu 2004. These are some of the supported ones, right? And again, should I be deploying SQL Server production workload on WSL? No, you shouldn't be. So whichever distribution you want, you just do a WSL install, and then D, and copy the distribution that you want. For example, 2404, 2204. Once you do that and reopen your terminal, you will see you have an option of Ubuntu 2204, which directly logs you in to your box. Of course, you have to give, for the first time login, you have to give your names, like what is the system name and all of that, and password. So all of that is stored. So now I have end-to-end Ubuntu 2204 actually running on my Windows box. So as you can see, this is an Ubuntu bash command opened up where now I can just run it like this was any other Ubuntu VM. And now to install SQL Server, let's do this. Let's just actually do an installation of SQL Server here. So first I have to download the public key to do the installation. So I have the commands written here. I download the public key, give the sudo password. Hopefully I've got it right. Yes, let me just overwrite it. Then here's the key. So I'm just now downloading the key. Once I have downloaded the key, I add the repo for SQL Server installation. Focus here, I'm actually doing a fresh SQL Server install. So for someone who's been working on Windows, this is like for the first time I have access to my box, and I'm actually doing a SQL Server installation for the first time here. So now I've added the repository from where I can download this package called as MS SQL Server. Now to do that, first things first, I have to first run the sudo apt-get update just to ensure that my repositories are updated. This may take about few minutes depending upon how fast your internet connection is. You know what? I should change my vocabulary, not minutes. We are on Linux now, so few seconds, right? So everything is here in seconds. So here, I'm just doing an installation of SQL Server. Now check this out. The installation of SQL Server has started. It downloads the latest CU 18 for SQL Server, I think CU 18 or 17, I forgot. This is SQL Server 22 that it's downloading. And once the package is downloaded, it might take about a few seconds. There you go. The installation is complete. Now, can you all see what it is asking me to do? It's saying the installation of the binary is already completed. Now you've got to do is run this command here to set up your SQL Server, which is to configure your SQL Server. This is the command I have to basically run. So the command I'm going to run here is, let me just clear this first so that you can see it. The command I'm going to run here is the configuration manager, and I'm asking it to set it up. Now, let's say I want to run developer edition, because remember, that's what development is all that is supported here on WSL, right? Then I accept the license, of course. Then I have to give a password and give a complicated password as much as you can. Hopefully, I give the one which matches. And once all of this is done, you should see that I have SQL Server up and running as a systemd service on an WSL Ubuntu 2204. And to confirm this, I can just do, there you go. I have it running. Now, how do I connect to it? So I'll just look at the IP address. It is 172 dot this. So now what I'm going to do is, can you see the management studio? So here is a management studio. So what I'm going to do is I am going to connect to this IP address. Hopefully I give the right password. There you go. So now here I have a SQL Server on Linux running. I don't know if you can see this a little nice tuck sitting here. This basically tells this is a SQL Server on Linux. I have this up and running over here. And if I do a simple command like select at version, run F5, and show you the output here, you'll notice this is indeed running SQL Server on Linux, and I'm connected using the same tools, right? There's no difference in the tools. I'm using SSMS. I'm actually using the preview bits of SSMS 21. I'm actually using that, connecting to it. I can create a database, do things that I would normally do on SQL Server and Windows exactly the same way that I would do here as on Linux as well. So the idea of showing you this with SSMS is to just tell you that it's just another SQL server. And as a DBA, it shouldn't really matter where this is running for you, whether this is on Linux, Windows, Ubuntu, wherever your application wants you to run SQL Server, you now have the ability to run it. And the knowledge that you already have for SQL Server, you can just apply that same knowledge over here as well. With that said, let's go back and let's do something called as, if you notice, my SQL Server agent is currently not running over here, right? If you notice, the agent is disabled. So let's enable the agent. To enable the agent, I go back to the WSL. Let me just clear this, and this is my configuration manager again. So I'm calling into the MS SQL config, and I'm saying set the agent to true. Once I do this, I just need to restart the service. So I say sudo systemctl restart MS SQL service. Now, as soon as I do that, what I want to show you is there is this MS SQL configuration file that's available here. Can you see this? This is the MS SQL configuration file available here, which basically, because I enabled agent, it now has this set to true. And this is your configuration manager. So this is the config file that you have to keep updating to make any changes to your configuration. Now let's see if the agent got enabled. So I'm just going to refresh this connection over here. Hopefully the IP address remains the same. And as you can see, I now have the agent enabled that I can actually work, create jobs, work with it, and do things like I would do it for SQL Server on Windows. Correct? So that is one. Now you say, okay, how do I basically enable some of the trace flags? So again, if you want to enable trace flags, you go here. Now these are not startup trace. These are startup trace flags that I'm enabling, right? I'm not doing a DBCC trace on. These are startup trace flags that I'm enabling. So I can go back here and enable some of these trace flags. And once I do that, again, I just run the system restart service and come back over here, or let me just show it first over here. So I just do a sudo and then look at my configuration file just to ensure that I have the trace flags enabled. So I have 1204 and I have 3979. 3979 is a FUA trace flag for SQL Server and Linux. So I have those trace flags enabled now. So this is how you can basically work with Configuration Manager and get yourself going in terms of your configurations for SQL Server on Linux. With that said, I think one more important aspect I want to show you is if you want to install tools, you can also do that by adding the repository for tools. And it's very simple. So let me just exit like this. Clear. When I say tools, what am I talking about? I'm actually talking about SQL CMD, right? So you can first get the repository up, run the get update, and once the update finishes, this is the tool set that you can deploy using the MS SQL Tools 18 and Unix ODBC so that you are able to connect to it. And again, within few seconds, you'll have the tools installed. Of course, I'll have to accept the license terms. And once that's done, I can then go to and SQL CMD minus S, CU. I am going to type the password, hopefully the correct one. Okay, I have to just say, there you go. So I'm now connected. I'm now connected using SQL CMD. So that's all there is, right? For you to get started. Now, if you deploy Docker engine on this and then deploy SQL Server as container, you could do that as well. For example, let me show you how easy it is for you to get started with Docker containers. Here, I have a VM that is running, correct? And in this VM, I have deployed a SQL Server Docker container. And how tough was it for me to deploy a Docker container? All it took me to deploy a SQL Server instance running Docker is this. So if you see, I say Docker run, then I accept the EULA, give the password that I want. Of course, don't have this simple password. It's not a good practice to do. And then give the name of your instance. This is like named instance, right? So SQL Linux is going to be the name of my instance. Host name is also going to be the Linux. And I'm going to use the latest 22 container. Now look at the speed at which my instance is up and running now. So there you go. I have now a SQL Server up and running. I want to connect to it. Remember the port is 5434. So I go back to my SSMS, right? I connect to the IP address. I am just going to zoom in so that you can see this. So this is my IP address. This is my port. I hope I'm giving the right password. This is a completely new SQL Server instance deployed and running in less than 30 seconds, folks. In less than 30 seconds, I have a container running. And for example, if I want to restore a database from a Windows box, so I took a database backup on a Windows machine. Now I want to restore it over here. All I've got to do here is click on Restore Database. Once I click restore database, copy the file, of course, copy the file and present it to the, into the location. And here I'll say add. This is a backup taken from a Windows box for a database running on Windows box. I click on OK. This backs up. Look at the files. On Windows, this was on the C program files, Microsoft SQL Server instance name. And here it's going in where opt MS SQL data test, right? I click OK. The database is restored successfully. Now I have my database up and running over here, and I can connect to it, work with it like I would do in any case. The reason why I wanted to show you the database being moved from a Windows to Linux box is just tell you that this is the same SQL Server engine that is powered on Windows, Linux, or containers. So you could just move your databases from one environment to the other without any issues at all. Right? Hopefully this is good for you to at least get started with WSL and with other things. With that said, let me go back to the slide deck. Okay, where is the presentation? I'm sorry, I'm a little lack of space today because I'm presenting this from a room. So Let me just go this. So we've seen the demo here. Now we looked at the configuration manager. You can actually use this for enabling agent, DB mail, you change the location for user databases, log files, change the location for your error log files. All of that can be done using MS SQL config utility that I just showed to you. Now, let's talk about getting started with SQL Server on Linux. Now, I want to very specifically let you know that all the best practices for SQL Server that you today apply on Windows, that works as is for SQL on Linux. Setting up max server memory, ensuring that you set up right DOPs, ensuring that you have the right number of temp-db files created when you're working with a lot of temp-db queries, that use temp-db. All of those best practices that you have for SQL Server, that still works and is the same for SQL Server on Linux. If you are in doubt, you can always run an assessment API that's available. Again, the links is provided in the later article that you can run to identify whether all of the best practices for SQL Server and Linux is properly configured or not. So you can always run that assessment API. Doesn't harm your production environments, right? Second, kernel and CPU settings. What are some of those settings that you need to do on the storage side, on the kernel side, on the IO side? All of that is very well documented. We have released benchmarks for TPC-H, for SQL Server running on RHEL 9, SQL Server 22 running on RHEL 9, even on RHEL 8. So all of that is pretty well documented and made available on the link that is there on this. Another aspect is you may have a question that, Amit, thank you so much for helping us to get started with containers and with Linux on one box. But when we are running things in production, we don't do installations on one machine. We do installations on a batch of machines. Do you have some sort of a tool that can help us run installations and deployments, configure Active Directory, all of that, so that I don't have to learn kutil, kpass, ktpass, and all of these concepts to add my server to an Active Directory domain and all of that? Do you have things that make it easy? If that is your question, and I know it's a long question, if that is your question, the answer to that is yes. I have a solution for that. And one of the solutions that I want to show you is how you can use Ansible. You could also use Chef, Puppet, and all of those. But there are configuration management tools like Ansible that you can use. And I want to also let you know that our collaboration with our partners like Red Hat is so close that starting RHEL 8.5, the SQL Server Ansible system role comes with the operating system. So you can just do an MS SQL install SQL role and it installs SQL Server role for you. So that's how easy it is. Similarly, for containers, you have, if you're deploying it on Kubernetes, you have a deployment YAML, a manual script that you can run. You have a Helm chart, a sample Helm chart that we have written, which you can call, just give configuration values and get started. Or we also have an operator that is made available from one of our partners, which will also set up high availability stack for you. So all of that is today available. Let's talk quickly about Ansible. Ansible is an agentless automation tool where you can have multiple targets. So look at your screen. On the right side, you have three targets: server 1, server 2, server 3. I don't have to install Ansible on server 1, server 2, server 3. No, I don't have to do that. All I've got to do is install Ansible on the control node, the node that you see sitting right at the center, managing all the three targets. On the control node, I install Ansible. Then I set up passwordless SSH access to the targets. So if I have to add another target called server 4, all I've got to do is enable a passwordless SSH access and update the host file to give the IP address of server 4. That's all that I've got to do to add a new target to do the deployment. And once you have all of this set up, the control node basically connects to the server 1, it does the SQL Server installation, reports back whether the installation was successful or not. Remember, with Ansible, not only can you just install SQL Server, because that's pretty basic, not just that, but you can actually tune your OS. It enables a kernel D setting, so that a tune D setting, so that it is the best environment for your database throughput. It also enables other services. I want to enable full text search. I want to run agent. I want to also run ML languages. All of that you can enable. TLS 1.2 enabling or disabling is something that you can do. And of course, you can add clustering stack to all of it. So on the Ansible system role, if you want to see the latest features, because every 6 months you'll see a new feature coming in, you can use the developer version of it. But for production deployments, use the one that comes with the OS. And the installation is as simple as Microsoft.SQL Server, install Microsoft.SQL.Server, right? Just to give you a demo, right? How easy is this? So take a look here. I'm going to do an installation on this box for SQL Server. The target is just one single box. I'm going to add this box to Active Directory and then connect to it using Windows authentication. Take a look how simple this is. The first thing I do, create a playbook.yaml, specify what is the version of SQL Server that you want to download, whether it is 22, what CU, what specific CUs you want to use. Then whether you want to tune this with FUA, because remember, if you're running OLTP workload, this is an important storage setting that you need to use for performance. Then you obviously provide whether you want to do an AD configuration. And once you say yes, you basically provide the Active Directory, the domain controller IP, the AD integration user and password. This is the domain user password that is used by SQL Server to connect. Then you, after you've provided all of this information, you just run the playbook.yaml using this command. And as you can see, within a few seconds or few minutes, it basically installed SQL Server, enabled Active Directory authentication, and joined this box and SQL Server with it to the Active Directory. So you didn't have to run any single command to do this. All you have to do is run through the playbook YAML. It's that simple, just with 2 commands. Now, once it's added to the domain, you can actually look at the MS SQL config, and you'll see the account that is used is SQL Linux, and the 3979 trace flag is enabled, and a key tab has also been created. Key tab is something that is used to connect your boxes to Windows domain and to be able to talk to the domain controller. So that's where the key tab is used. Now, with this done, the next step is basically to show you how easy it is to connect. So I open SSMS, I click on connect option, and as you can see right now I'm connected as sysadmin, but I click on connect option, uh, or first I have to create a login, as you can see, which is Amwin, and then once I create the login, I can just go ahead and connect to it using Windows authentication, as you can see, because it's part of the domain, and it will work without any issues. And as on the screens that you can see, the SQL Server Windows authentication is connected and up and running without any problems. Not just that, it also configured my kernel and system settings to use the best settings that are available for SQL Server. And this is done through the tuned profile. And this profile, you don't have to remember any of these values. This is called as the SQL Server profile. It automatically downloads it, enables it on your machine. This is a recommended best practice that we ask customers to do, enables it and gets you going. So all in all, for you, you didn't have to do any of this. All you had to do was download the system role, create the YAML file, ensure that the hosts or the targets are added to the YAML, and get started with it. That's all that you had to do. With that said, now let's go to the next section, which is about the performance and clustering stack. Like I've been talking about, the storage recommendations, the kernel CPU recommendations with the TUND profile, even the network settings, all of that has been very well defined and made available on performance best practices. Once again, if you see that there are some specific items that are missing, please reach out to me if you have questions about any of these items, even after reading this link if you are not able to understand. The idea is all of that has been tested, verified, and then published so that customers can get the best out of their systems for SQL Server when running on Linux environments. Finally, one thing that I very specifically want to talk to ensure that you are aware is the clustering stack tech. The technology for clustering on Windows is Windows Server Failover Cluster that we use. The technology on Linux, we have multiple technologies that you can use. As you can see on the right side of your screen, you have HP Service Guard, you have Pacemaker, you have DH2I DX Enterprise, and these different clustering stacks are supported for SQL. So you may ask, why don't you have one single clustering stack like you have for Windows? If you remember, even for Windows, we not just support WSFC, we also support Veritas clustering, right? When I say we, I mean Veritas supports the clustering stack. SQL Server on Veritas cluster is also supported. So I'm just giving you an example there, right? So even on Windows, you have multiple clustering stack. Similarly, on Linux, there are multiple clustering stack. For example, DX Enterprise is the only clustering stack that's available on containers today, where you can deploy SQL Server container on Kubernetes. Kubernetes provides you a pod level high availability, but a database level high availability using always on availability group is provided on top of DX Enterprise clustering stack, which is supported by DX Enterprise, which is another partner of ours, DH2I. They support it, and you can basically run SQL Server on top of it, right? So because Linux is an ecosystem, we have to support multiple clustering stack, and that's what we try, and we add as many clustering stacks as possible. If you have a clustering stack that you don't see documented, please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to understand what it is and how we can basically work on that. So that is something that if you have a question on, more than happy to talk about. Now, this slide basically tells you what options you can use. So if you're running SQL Server on Windows, you can use DH Enterprise, DX Enterprise, DH2Is, DX Enterprise clustering on Windows Linux containers. HP Service Guard Linux, not on Windows, just on Linux, VMs, server deployments, containers, and Kubernetes. Pacemakers, it's available on Linux only and VMs and server deployments, not in containers. So your choice of choosing which one depends upon where you are going to install SQL Server. So according to that, please select your clustering tech, your clustering stack to ensure that you get the best out of it. With that said, something which is very close to a DBA, and I totally understand why it is very close to them. Like how containers and getting easily started is closer to data engineers and developers. For DBAs, something that really rings a bell is, where are my error logs? Where are my system application logs? And tell me, where is my perfmon counters or task manager in case if I want to try and understand what is happening. First and foremost, if you're running SSMS, the reports that you have, the deadlock, overall performance report, all of that reporting works for Linux as well. So you can just right click on that instance, pull up a standard report, see it. All of that works well for SQL Server on Linux as well. But where are my error logs? Where are my system logs? All of this is something that is also available in this blog that someone from our team has written, from the field team has written. You can definitely refer to it. It's a good blog to get started with. The error logs, the X event, the default traces, all of that is located for SQL Server on Linux by default at where opt MSSQL log. That is the location where it is there. The system logs, the name of the log depends upon the distribution that you're running. For rel and SLES, we call it as messages. For Ubuntu, it's called as syslog. The easiest way to look at system logs, like how you open event viewer in your Windows box, the easiest way to refer to a system log in Linux is using journalctl. So you can say journalctl hyphen unit, give the service name, in this case, MSSQL server.service, and you can also give last 1 hour, last 2 hours, or you can say, I just need the last 10 entries of it, top 10 entries of it. Any of those commands with journalctl. So just look up for journalctl. You'll be able to identify the different parameters that you can use. Where is my task manager? Where are my perfmon counters? Like how you have task manager and perfmon counters, you also have something called as top, htop, using which you can look at the CPU utilization, the packets, system calls that you can run to actually identify what are the system calls that are basically running all of that. So all of that today is made available to you on Linux to enable you to be able to successfully troubleshoot, debug an issue if it arises, right? So all of that information is available. Finally, I've been speaking nonstop for 50 minutes. Like I said, I want to leave the last 5 to 8 minutes for questions and answers so that it can become more easier for us to discuss with each other. The final slide, if you want to look at some of the reference architectures, you want to look at some of the benchmarks that we have published, here is a link for you. Basic FAQs. How is my licensing going to be different? Is there a difference actually? No, there is no difference between licensing SQL in Windows and SQL in Linux. So how do I get started, let's say, with the basics? Where are some of the tutorials? All of that is available in the FAQ section, which again, I've added a link to it. With that said, I thank you so much for taking time out on a weekday and spending that last 55 minutes with me. With that said, thank you so much. And now I open for any questions that you might have. I am okay if you want to unmute and ask me a question, or if you want to put it on the chat, I'm okay to answer the question there as well. So thank you. Thank you once again. And I hope you get started with Linux and containers and can enable the next gen applications that your application teams are working on.
A few questions are already in the chat box, Amit. I guess you can say that. So, few have asked the questions there. Rajesh,
Yeah,
Vimal, yeah.
yeah. I will take from the top. So is WSL supported on Windows 11? I think so. Yes, it is supported. But you can definitely refer to the online documentation available from WSL, and you should be able to get that. So hopefully that answers your question, Rajesh. How do we use Ansible to patch and upgrade SQL Server instances on Linux in a controlled manner? To be honest with you, patching and upgrading on SQL on Linux is such an easy thing that if you're running, for example, if you're running a container, patching it is as simple as just changing the image. So when you're running a container, you also have an option to provide, you basically provide a persistent storage where your databases and all of that are stored, and you can then just change the image. So instead of using, let's say SQL 22 CU17 or CU14, you can immediately change to CU17 and still point to the older persistent storage for databases. So that is as easy as that. In case of Ansible, can you do it? You can. Is there a playbook YAML for it? I can share that as part of the slide deck to kind of just show you some of the samples. And even the links that I already have in that box will also have some of those enabled for you. So you can take a look at those as well. So that is there. Then I hope that answers your question, Vimal. If not, more than happy to take any follow-ups. Uh, the third question is, are there cost advantages to running SQL on Linux versus Windows? How does licensing compare? Licensing for SQL Server on Linux and Windows is the same license. There's no separate license for SQL Server on Linux. SQL Server as a product is something that as a choice you have that you can run on any environment of your choice, and the licensing does not change that. So if you already have licenses purchased for SQL Server on Windows, that same thing can be used on Linux. There's no difference in that. If you're running Linux, you basically pay for the Linux licensing. And if you're running on Windows, you pay for the Windows OS licensing. So that's the only difference. I don't see any SQL savings that you'll do on licensing itself. If you have an SA contract, like how you have unlimited virtualization option for with SA contracts for SQL Server, you have unlimited containerization options also for SQL Server and containers. So that is an answer for that. Any other questions? Thank you, Rajesh. I'm glad that you liked it. Any other questions? Anything else? Again, like I said, I will share a link to my book in case if you want to refer to it and know more about Linux, about Azure SQL, different products inside Azure SQL. If you want to know more about that, I'll refer that book in the slide deck as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My alias is AMVIN87. Yeah, so I don't know why I created it with that alias. That basically tells the year of my birth. So, yeah, but when we are kids, we do some stupid things, right? So, one of those. So you could uh, absolutely reach out to me over LinkedIn as well. Yeah, I'll share my LinkedIn. I just did, but I'll share my entire LinkedIn link profile. All right. If no other questions, happy to give you back 2 minutes, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Amit, for providing a comprehensive overview on SQL Server on Linux. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, no. We like to wind up today's session. Thank you for everybody for joining, and always keep a lookouting for upcoming webinars in future as well. We will be posting the highlights and everything in our webinar YouTube channel, that is Geopits. And we will also follow us on LinkedIn. We'll give a short highlights on that and update on upcoming webinars also. Thank you for everybody, and a special thanks to Amit for taking over this. Thank you.
Thank you for to GeoPits team as well. Thank you, folks.